Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome to Consider This. I have had governors on this show, U.S. senators, congresspeople, lieutenant governors, and now I think aren't you next in line somewhere in there?
Somewhere in there.
I have the pleasure of having the Nebraska Secretary of State on our show this week. That's a first for me.
Carol, it's great to be here. Thanks for asking me.
We're going to talk elections. What an election.
Incredible.
From an administrative point of view, it was a great challenge, and it almost lived up to your predictions.
Just about. When I came aboard as Secretary of State, it was December 19, 2000, just shortly after the presidential election of November 2000. And so I've lived through kind of the firestorm and aftermath of that election and all the changes that have occurred until this year was the first time that we actually were implementing some of the changes that Congress had mandated. And we feel real good about it. We think things worked well, not only in Nebraska, but nationwide. As you said, I did predict 75% turnout, and we knew we were being a little optimistic, but it was amazing how many things we're looking at that were anticipating a very record turnout. And of course, we had one in terms of numbers. We had 770,000 people actually vote, and that's the largest number since we started recording turnout in 1968.
Wow.
So it was a big election year.
What were the trickiest mandates after the 2000 thing to put into place, or maybe the most costly? I mean, for you as Secretary of State.
Well, we probably haven't reached the most challenging ones, but Congress requires us to meet all of their mandates by January 1, 2006. So we have 2 more years to get everything in place. But this year, one of the big things was provisional balloting. And we were able to get that fully implemented in the primary, and we've had it in the general election. And we had close to 18,000 people cast provisional ballots.
Statewide, and there were like
Statewide.
8,000 in Douglas County.
And 8,000 in Douglas County and about 3,000 in Lancaster County. And every county had, every precinct I think had someone cast a provisional ballot.
Now,
and that's a big victory.
Why, this is all new. I mean, I remember after the 2000 election, all these they passed all these mandates, and then everything was kind of quiet. You were doing all the behind the scenes work, all the election commissioners of the counties were doing it, and then all of a sudden in the news, provisional ballot this, provisional ballot that, the ex-convicts in Florida could only cast provisional. I mean, it was like a new deal.
And I think the reason was, it was the first mandate that we were required to accomplish. But it was really pretty extraordinary because in the election of 2000, there were about 1 million people who lost their right to vote because their registration was incorrect, and they were challenged and they had to leave. With provisional balloting, if you go in to vote and they challenge your registration, you still cast a provisional ballot, and then they double check it within 10 days. And in Nebraska, about 80% of those provisional ballots counted. Now, in the year 2000, 0 of them would have counted. So we really have been able to enfranchise people who simply had moved and hadn't re-registered for one reason or another, and still were able to get their ballots counted. So that was a big victory.
It would be like going to court, losing a case, and having no right of appeal. I
mean,
that's
the
right.
Way it was once before. Once you leave, I mean, there is no way that you can redeem your right to vote, even if they're wrong, even if you are registered, they just don't have a record of it. Now that's the first mandate, and we feel like it worked the way it should work. And it's worked that way across the nation. So those 1 million people who were disenfranchised in 2000 shouldn't have been disenfranchised in 2004. Now the second mandate is having a statewide interactive voter registration system. As you know, for 200 years, elections have been run by the counties, have not been run by the secretaries of state or by the federal government.
Even though you sort of had that responsibility.
Ultimately, have had that responsibility, mostly just in tabulation of the votes, preparing the ballots.
A lot of that goes back to the old politics, doesn't it?
An administrative role.
The county.
The counties are very strong.
Yeah, I mean, but
element of government.
Back when politics was more local, we didn't have national ads, and everything was local.
And in those days, back when you're riding horses or riding in wagons, you could only travel 15 miles a day. So county governments were really probably the most significant seat of government that you dealt with in your lifetime as a citizen. That's changed significantly with interstate highways and jet planes and communication systems, but nevertheless, the system of elections didn't change until after the year 2000.
So what does this interconnectivity or whatever, what does that entail?
Statewide interactive voter registration system. That is now centralized with the Secretary of State. So rather than having each county with its own independent registration system, which may not even be compatible with their next door neighbor,
Probably
now
isn't.
it will be a statewide, compatible, uniform, consistent system, and it will be something that will be checked in real time, meaning virtually daily, to know who is registered and who's not registered. So if somebody is registered in Scottsbluff County and they move to Lancaster County, under the old system you wouldn't know that unless it was communicated by the voter and they told their new precinct, well, I moved from Scottsbluff, and then they would have it canceled in Scottsbluff. Now we'll do that through an interactive computer-based system.
So if I move from Scottsbluff and I register in Omaha, I have a new address, I prove that I live there, it will not only register me, but it will take care of if I was registered somewhere else in
That's right.
Nebraska.
It'll cancel wherever you came from. So you don't have the problem of duplicate registrations, and you don't have the opportunity for possible voter fraud where somebody votes twice because they're still registered in one county, they're registered in a new county. We'll know that instantly in our system once that new registration is filed. So it helps improve our ability to eliminate some fraud in the system, but it also gives a much more reliable system so we don't have this mishmash of different kinds of systems out there. It's a single system and it's integrated, and we're responsible for it. Now, 45% of all registrations come through the Department of Motor Vehicles. Some 300,000 a year.
Motor voter.
Motor voter, that's what it is. Started in 1995 in Nebraska, and it's been a very significant element in the increase in voter registrations in
Well,
Nebraska
how
and
does
across
that
the
get
country.
inputted when I go? Because that's a whole different, motor vehicles is a whole different computer system, I would guess.
Well, I'm not a computer expert, Carol, but it will interface with that system. So the Department of Motor Vehicles system will compatibly interface with our system, and that information digitally will exchange from one to the other, and they tell us in a very, very effective, reliable method without any additional human labor. Right now, it's all paper-based. You fill out a piece of paper, you mail it to your county clerk or election commissioner. They make a record of it in their system. But this will be programmed in electronically, and we think it's going to be very reliable. And one thing that is important about provisional voting also is the fact that you can double check on a Watts 800 number or on our website whether or not your vote counted. So if you cast a provisional ballot and you're worried about, well, they challenged me, I cast this provisional ballot.
Or is it sitting in a box somewhere?
Did it get lost, misplaced? You can check on our website you're given a PIN number, or you can call on an 800 number, and once we have that fully integrated voter registration system, it'll be an instant check for us to tell people, yes, you voted and your vote did count.
One quick thing before we move on to some of the things that kind of happened during this election. I would guess that this new computer, everybody's talking to each other on the digital side, is going to be good for all these initiative petitions that come to your door. When they hand you these big petitions with all these alleged signatures of registered voters, it should be a lot easier than having the counties have to do everything.
I hope that will help, because that is a massive undertaking. When you have 180,000 signatures that come in, like we did on some of the gambling initiatives, and they're spread all across the state. You have to have 5% of the registered voters in, I think it's some 35 counties, and then you have to have 10% of the total registered voters, and all of those sheets of paper come in to us, and then we have to turn around and send them back out to the county clerks as pieces of paper, and then they have to double check them against their records. I think that will infinitely improve our ability to double check those.
So you'll be able to do that all from your office? Or
I
or
have
are you
not
gonna
had
send
that
them out?
confirmed to me, but hopefully. Theoretically, because we'll have a lot of the information, but we won't have the signature, and that's one of the things that has to be
They'll have
double
to
checked.
check.
So there's a lot of the information that we can double check just to see if those people are registered voters, because a lot of signatures get disqualified because the people aren't registered.
So you
or
can
they're
eliminate
registered.
off
So
the
we
top.
can eliminate quite a bit off the top, and then the rest will still have to go out. Now, we still need to improve that because that system is a pretty slow system of getting those circulated to the counties, have them check them, get them back to us. And I would like to see us be able to fax those documents out in some way, or maybe scan them and send them electronically, because most of the signatures should be verifiable as a fax copy or as a digital electronic copy. But we're looking into that because we need to speed that up. Those petitions, not only the petitions for the initiatives, the gambling initiatives, but also the petitions for the various presidential candidates, took us right up until September 1, right up until our deadline, which didn't leave enough time really. The counties all had to scramble then to get their ballots ready and sent out to the absentee voters. So
Darn that, Ralph
we need to
Nader.
improve that a little bit.
Well, speaking of Ralph Nader, and these deadlines and meeting these deadlines, there was some talk in the national media, and that doesn't mean it's really an issue. You know, we in the media bring things up just to see. But I believe it was one of the people suggesting, it was former Nebraska Senator Bob Kerrey, that maybe there should be some uniformity in requirements where presidential elections are involved. I suppose, as I read it, it meant like that voter registration deadlines be the same, so that everybody, and which would make it easier to publicize things, or that certain procedures, and I don't know which ones they would be uniform throughout the country.
Across the country. Well, as you probably remember, after the election of 2000, people were polled by polling agencies like Gallup Poll, and about 90% of the people said, federalize this system. It's so chaotic, it's so unreliable, it's so different from state to state. We've got electronic voting, we've got lever action voting, we've got punch card voting. Let's bring it all together and unify it under a federal system, like happened with the security guards at airports. Suddenly they were all federal. Well, there was a lot of resistance to that, including the secretaries of state and the governors, because it seemed like a pretty radical step to go from a county-based system
and I
suddenly
wasn't
to a
necessarily
federal
talking
system.
that extreme.
But there still is kind of an undercurrent of people who still would like to see it a federal system. I don't think that's necessary. We've had such a wonderful 200 years of history of a balance between states and the federal government. And even in the Help America Vote Act that passed in 2002 that has these mandates we talked about, it allows experimentation by the states. It allows states to be different in the way they handle some of these things. And that allows maybe the best practice to evolve in one state, and the other states will pick it up. We watch what each other's doing, but to make things uniform under a federal system and make every county election official a federal official,
No, I don't
we
think
need to
that's
do
what they
that.
were talking about. I mean, maybe that survey was, but I think they were just saying that deadlines for, non-Democratic Republican candidates like Nader and the Green Party, maybe procedures for allowing people on the presidential ballot, because they are different from state to state. But
It is, but in Nebraska we've got a pretty good system, so I guess if I was going to recommend one to the world, to the other states, I would say ours works pretty well. What we do by state law is we watch the news coverage of various individuals who aspire to be a presidential candidate, and those who are making themselves newsworthy and showing some genuine capability of being a presidential candidate, I can just name them and place them on the ballot. Unfortunately, Ralph Nader wasn't expressing a particular inclination to be a presidential candidate back at the time that happened in the spring,
Right.
as we moved into the summer, and so he had to petition on. It wasn't because I refused to put him on, it just wasn't clear that he was going to be a candidate yet. Now, so there always has to be an option, I think, for candidates to petition on. yes, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort, particularly if you're going to try to be a candidate in every state. And I think Ralph Nader ended up being a candidate in some 22 states.
Yes,
so
he did.
He accomplished quite a bit, and was able to use that exemption to the general rule, because most candidates come through a state convention or come through the primary.
Or have to meet some sort of, like the Libertarians, at these third parties that have to meet some sort of standard.
Well, you know, we had 7 candidates. We had 7 presidential candidates on the Nebraska ballot.
I know.
Now, most of them
I was
were
blown
kind of
away when
ignored, but we certainly haven't prohibited or excluded or unduly limited the ability of people to become presidential
And you can always
candidates.
write in Mickey Mouse. Not
And
that I
that-
ever would
you can.
misuse my vote that way. But
Do you
okay.
remember America's Liberator?
Yes.
Years ago, the cowboy kind of wore a red, white, and blue cowboy outfit. He was always on the Nebraska ballot for president.
Absolutely.
America's Liberator.
That was one of the exciting, fun, or I should say at least fun things about
kind
the
of a fun
election.
thing.
We have to keep our sense
Maybe
of
better
humor.
than Mickey Mouse.
Is it the feeling of the secretaries of state, because I know you talk amongst yourselves,
Yes, we do.
that the best, was it the best defense is a good offense in terms of staying ahead of problems now, anticipating problems?
Well, yes.
I mean, that's
think
kind of
that's
what
a good way to express it. I think there's been a big shift, and I don't know that the whole country quite recognizes it, but the United States Congress, under the Help America Vote Act, has consolidated a lot of authority in the Secretaries of State, and they've said, we want to deal with 50 Secretaries of State. We don't want to deal with 2,700 counties anymore, and that will bring about some uniformity. But truthfully, we, ever since 2000, we are very attentive to studying what each other's doing and trying to bring some uniformity and consistency and trying to help each other eliminate problems that they might face. It's still a big challenge. As you know, we face this big debate today as we move away from punch card equipment.
Touch screen, paperless trails.
Now we've moved into the
Touchscreens.
electronic equipment, and so a number of states now are adopting electronic equipment with digital ballots, which has no paper trail. And so there's this big debate about, do we need to have a paper trail or paper ballots in order to have recounts?
I think if you talk to the
equipment?
folks in Sarpy County, which I did,
They had some difficulty.
well, they had some problems with some hardware or software in the computer
Right.
that had some strange formula that sort of happened on counting votes. But the bottom line is that Ed Gilbert, the deputy election
Right.
commissioner there, was thrilled to death that they had to recount them, that they had the paper to put through the optical scanner one more time.
And that's the fail-safe system of Nebraska.
And we're going to continue on that
our
track,
optical
are we
scan
not?
system, yes, we are. That's our hope and our goal, and that's kind of the next big challenge that we face, Carol, is what kind of equipment are we going to bring in to supplement what we have. And that's the beauty of what happened in Sarpy County or what happened in Lancaster County is you still have the paper ballots, and as a last resort, you still could hand count those. You have a verifiable trail. And those states that are using electronic equipment without a modem that creates a paper receipt have to really count on their technicians to get that equipment right and to follow it correctly. So if there's a little bit of a glitch, it gets corrected right away. There were some real problems in North Carolina with some equipment that could only handle up to 3,000 ballots per piece of equipment, and they were using equipment far in excess of that, and they lost 40,000 digital ballots. Well, you can't have that happen.
No.
If you're going to go to electronic equipment, you really have to be sure you've got very well-trained county officials on the job and some excellent technicians who are there available from the vendor to back up and make sure that equipment works. You can't lose ballots if you're using electronic equipment. So other states are experimenting with it, and it is replacing a lot of the punch card equipment, which everybody agrees probably was the least reliable kind of equipment. So we're glad to get rid of that. It was paper ballots, but the paper ballots weren't even
Yeah, I am so glad we
reliable
didn't have to hear about hanging and pregnant chads.
dimples and pregnant chads and hanging chads. So this year, 35% of our nation voted with electronic equipment. So it's a pretty big percentage. It was about 11% back
Were they
in
all
2000.
paperless though? Or
yes.
did they have varying
Virtually all
degrees
were
of-
paperless.
Or various, maybe did they? Maybe I should say, were they all without some sort of trail?
Yes, pretty much, because all of that equipment was bought before this big debate started. So now we're under debate. The Secretary of State of Ohio, the Secretary of State of California have both said, we will not allow any counties to buy electronic equipment unless there is a modem attached that will create a paper receipt. Not a receipt the voter can take, but a receipt the voter can look at to confirm that their vote on the screen is the same as their vote on this piece of paper. Then they hit enter or complete, and that piece of paper disappears into the rack below the machine. So there is a paper trail. So it's interesting, those two major states, that they, after their own investigations, have decided that equipment isn't yet reliable enough to go without paper ballots. So in Nebraska, here's our question. We have 85% of our voters currently voting with paper ballots that are counted by the optical scan equipment, rapid, speedy counting.
Then the scan equipment feeds the data into a computer.
And then it feeds the data in the computer. And it only has about a 1% error rate. Hand counting, it could be anywhere from 5 to 10%. People get tired, they get confused, they put things on a
I can't
table
even
and forget
count
about
money
it.
without dollar bills without messing it up.
So hand count is not a very reliable system, but this optical scan is the most reliable, and that's what we had, even though we had a few problems. But we have 40 counties, which only represent 15% of our voters, that still hand count. And under the federal law, we can't allow that to exist past 2006. Mm-hmm. So in order to correct that, we have to furnish equipment to the counties that will allow every county to be counted the same way. And optical scan seems to be the most reliable. Now we also have to have equipment that allows the handicapped and the visually impaired voter to have a private unassisted ballot. There are about 30 million Americans who say they're second-class citizens because somebody has to help them cast a ballot under the current system. And they said, we want a private ballot like everybody else.
It violates the secret ballot, yeah.
They just, that's almost a sacred right in America, is to have a ballot that nobody knows how you voted.
But
so there's no repercussions.
Don't the computers even have that problem? Say there's a computer, maybe the handicap they could have a monitor sitting on a smaller table where they can move up with a wheelchair, but if you're blind, that's still a problem.
Well, that's one of the advantages of electronic equipment, and that's one of the reasons that some of the states have already gone to it, is that it's like a monitor, it's like an ATM screen or computer screen, and it's visual, but it also has lots of bells and whistles that you can attach. Like if you are visually impaired or blind, you can attach an accessory that
thing
you can listen to, and then the screen goes blank and it walks you through how to vote, and nobody else can see how you're voting. In fact, they even have accessories that will allow somebody who is a quadriplegic to use a blow stick and still cast a secret ballot. Now that's the ultimate right to a private ballot, because otherwise that person would have to have somebody fill it out the way they want it. So that was one of the huge advantages, and Congress was pushing for that in a big way, is accommodate these 30 million Americans that want a private unassisted ballot. So the reason electronic equipment jumped in was for that reason. But now we're kind of all backing off and saying, well, let's take another look at it.
And it's costly.
Oh, it's expensive equipment. It's somewhere in the range of $3,500 per unit. So if we put one in to all 1,500 of our precincts in Nebraska, we're going to be spending close to $10 million. So it's not an inexpensive thing, but the federal government has furnished us in Nebraska with $18 million to help implement all of these things.
So more to come on that.
More to come.
I mean,
more to come.
You're headed in a direction, but more to come. I want to whip through a bunch of things
Certainly,
really fast.
sure.
The long lines, running out of ballots, some various things that happened in the state. I know they were aggravating to the few people that were affected.
Certainly.
And even the snitty news media that didn't get their totals early enough so they could go to bed. But I found it still exhilarating. I didn't have to wait in a church for ballots to come, but I found it rather, it made me pay a lot of attention as these came in. I had more time to digest how they were coming in and who was voting how. And actually, I found it neat.
Well, you liked our website.
Very good.
Because it was really updated just in real time as information would come in, and and we've had a lot of compliments on that. I think we had like 80,000 hits on that election night. But you're right. It's just
Douglas County's wasn't
hugely frustrating.
good to go at 8 o'clock as it generally
It was
is.
not ready to go,
But-
and there were some reasons why that happened. Hopefully, those reasons won't happen again. But the precincts weren't getting all of the results to the sheriff's office in order to get them to the election commissioner's office. There were a few precincts that were slow, and so that held everything up. And so, by the time it all got to the sheriff's office to get to the election commissioner, it was too late to start voting. So the Douglas County tally wasn't there and available for the immediate 8 o'clock on the absentee ballots. And we were sorry about that, because we were hoping that we would have that, all the absentee ballots would be counted and you'd have that immediate information.
I think the
So there's always
losers
some-
need it sooner, though. They need to
But you
find
know,
out.
no election is perfect. We work very, very hard at trying to overcome all of these problems. But for example, think how fast Western Douglas County and Sarpy County have been growing. Subdivisions spring up overnight, and you can't create new voting precincts between the primary and the general election. And in that period of time, in some of those areas, say around Gretna or Elkhorn, you'll have multiple subdivisions that will spring up, houses will get finished,
Yeah.
people will move in. You may have 500 new voters in a precinct, and you can't create a new precinct. Now, nevertheless, you should probably try to anticipate that with additional poll workers, additional ballots, but it is a challenge. It's a challenge, and we hope that won't happen again.
You always learn from your mistakes. That's the key. Is
And
if
that's
you
the key.
guys learn
That's
from your
right.
mistakes, then we can live with that. I think by and large people, certainly the people of Nebraska are like that. We have only a minute. I just want to ask one quick question. I noticed there's a large number of elderly poll workers, and many of our election commissioners are concerned about the ability to keep poll workers, especially
Absolutely.
with increasing populations in certain part of towns. Do they talk about that?
It's a problem nationwide. We're all facing it. It takes 2 million people to run elections nationwide. It takes 12,000 people to run elections in Nebraska. A lot of people. And we are concerned about the fact that we're losing a lot of the elderly poll workers. So we've started a new program called the Youth Poll Worker Program, and just started it this year for this general
So you're
election.
grooming them early. They
We're
can
trying
help
to
out. They're not real poll workers.
And there's a double benefit to it. Not only do we get the benefit of having them help as poll workers, but we also get them interested in the election process. Young people, by and large, are disconnected, disengaged, and this is a way to bring them in. And we had 83 of them, so it was a very good start.
But this is a very good end to the show because we've run out of time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you,
good luck
Carol.
in 2 years, Secretary of
Thank
State
you.
John
I'll be
Gale.
happy to
We'll
come back anytime.
See you next week.
Thank you.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.